Hello, and welcome to the You Know You Deserve More podcast spotlight interview series. My name is Stephanie Puryear-Helling, and I am thrilled to welcome my guest, Cindy Clare, today. Before we jump into some questions, we're going to talk to Cindy about transformational leadership, building resilient teams, and leading teams through change. Let me tell you a little bit about Cindy. Many of you who are either going to listen live or catch the replay know Cindy, but for those of you that don't, I want to tell you a little bit about this incredible and accomplished woman. And if you do know her, some of these highlights are definitely worth repeating. So let me tell you about Cindy. Cindy Clare has been an active leader across the rental housing industry for more than 30 years. She serves as the Chief Operating Officer for Bell Partners. Before joining Bell in 2017, Cindy served for 12 years as President of Property Management at Kettler, where her leadership helped the company grow and expand. She has also served in numerous leadership positions at all levels of the National Apartment Association, including time as president of the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metropolitan Washington, AOBA, and the board of directors of the Apartment Association of North Carolina, AANC. Cindy was the third woman to chair NAA's board of directors, where her efforts led to the creation of the first diversity and inclusion task force, as well as the corporate social responsibility task force, both of which have become standing entities and continue to make positive change for the apartment industry. Most notably, Cindy was inducted into the NAA Hall of Fame in 2022, which is the highest honor that can be bestowed upon a rental housing professional. Cindy accepted this award during Apartmentalize in 2022. And I'm going to read you one more quote. And I know, Cindy, you hate this, but it's so worth everyone hearing. Cindy's steadfast work and leadership across the rental housing industry has made and continues to make an incredibly meaningful impact, said Bob Pinnegar, NAA President and CEO. During her chairmanship in 2017, Cindy's transformative leadership helped move NAA and the entire industry in a new direction. And we all congratulate Cindy. So I had the honor and privilege of working alongside and underneath Cindy during her year as chair of NAA, because that same year I was the president of the National Apartment Association Education Institute. And I think it was the year of the woman, because every woman that was chairing the NSC, obviously the NAA Board of Directors, EI, and the association executive, I think, were all women. So without further ado, Cindy, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to talk with me today. I am so thrilled and honored to have you here. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, for having me. And that is a very nice introduction. I did not do that all on my own. Let's just be very clear about that.
Well, and we don't do it all on our own, right?
Right.
I spoke with Rhonda Puryear earlier today, the fourth woman to chair the NAA Board of Directors. And we talked a lot about sort of what got her to where she is, and the importance of acknowledging the people along the way who have made a difference and helped us to both succeed in our own right, but the people that we've led along the way, that we've helped, to get a leg up and encouraged to expand and grow their career. So, but you're always ever so humble, and you should absolutely take credit where credit's due as well, my friend.
Thank you.
So, you're welcome. Okay, so let's dive in. So I'm going to ask questions about transformational leadership, leading change, and then resiliency. So my first question for you regarding transformational leadership, obviously you've been in multiple leadership roles, serving the multifamily industry and residential property management throughout your career. And, as you've done so, you have inspired people like myself and many others to push beyond their perceived limits. So can you share a personal philosophy or an experience that has shaped your ability to lead in this way?
Well, I think it starts with I grew up in a military family. And so I moved every couple of years. And when I tell this story, people always laugh because I was painfully shy as a child. And if you know me now, you go, no, that can't be. I am also the
Honey, I
quiet.
was painfully shy too, believe
Yeah,
it or not. Yeah.
right. And I am the quiet one in my family. Um, and so what I learned though, as an adult from that growing up, is the ability to adjust and adapt. You have to be willing to pivot. And I think be uncomfortable. And I think that is one of the, as a leader, if you're going to lead people through change or you're going to lead people in general, you have to be a little uncomfortable with challenge and change, and but still be willing to power through. And you have to be willing to pivot and listen and learn. And so I think those are all big pieces. The other big thing that I learned very early on, when I was first promoted to a regional manager, my I was 25, my youngest manager was 60, and my oldest manager was almost 80. So all of them had been managing properties longer than I'd been alive. And it's a great learning experience to realize that you are leading people that know more than you do, or at least certainly have more experience than you do. And you have to be willing to listen to those perspectives and then find a way to get people to do something different than maybe what they've done for 20 years. And a lot of that is being willing to try something, but acknowledge if it works, if it doesn't work, or adjust when it doesn't go exactly the way you want it to. So I think those were two big pieces for me.
I love that. You know, I was talking to someone during a leadership session that I was facilitating this week, and she was sharing challenges in leading someone who has much more experience than she does, and there is an age, barrier. And probably one of the most challenging people that I ever led was someone who was significantly more experienced and older than me. But to your point, what I learned in order to make that working relationship successful is I really had to appeal to her experience and to her intelligence and leverage that in a way that helped us accomplish what we were going to accomplish, right? And I think, something else that Rhonda and I talked about earlier, as a leader, it's about recognizing that we don't always, nor should we always, be the smartest person on the team.
Correct.
We need to identify talent that we need to have a well-rounded team, and then leverage that talent and develop them to get things done. So I absolutely love that. I think that's fantastic advice.
Absolutely.
All right. So my next question for you, as a leader, how do you balance creating stability for your team while also embracing disruption as an opportunity for growth?
So this is probably one I'm not as good at as my team. If anybody on my team's listening, they're laughing out loud because I love to disrupt. But I've learned to listen. Again, that listening will come up a lot because you have to know when to when to stop, when to make changes. And so now a lot of the time when I look at changes or disruptions, is it going to move the needle? Is it going to make a difference? Is it going to be something that either improves things for our residents, improves things for our associates, which ultimately improves things for our residents? And know that you can't do everything. So pick carefully the changes that you're going to make so that you balance the stability and the disruption. Sometimes you can control that, sometimes you can't. I mean, think about how disruptive COVID was to our business. We had to change everything. We had to change everything we were doing. And understanding that and being willing to make those changes, but again, pivot and adjust as you go so that the disruption, knowing that it was going to be disruptive, that we would have to adjust because we were doing things on the fly much faster than we would typically have done them. But when you have the opportunity, you want to be strategic about it and you want to be thoughtful about what you're doing.
Absolutely. And there are some changes that we have to make because we're forced to, for
Yeah,
lack of a better word, right? And so in that instance, what's the best next step that we need to take in order to manage this change effectively, particularly when it was thrust upon us like COVID was. And you're
exactly.
so right. We had to change almost everything in terms of how we were accustomed to doing business. Some of those changes were more difficult than others, but I think now, 4.5 years later, 5 years later, there are some changes that we were forced to make as businesses, not just in multifamily, but all business, that now have become part of the new way of doing things, such as remote working, which some people were doing beforehand, but a lot of organizations still had that former mindset that everybody has to be in the office no matter what. And while there's certainly value in that, particularly depending on some people's positions, we also learned that many positions could work remotely, even part-time, coming back to it, or completely 100%. And they're
Right.
actually more efficient, more productive. And so I think that was one good thing that came out of that, right? We learned that.
Absolutely. And I think we were forced to embrace technology in the multifamily industry in particular, far more than we had ever been done. And some of that has stuck. A lot of it has stuck. And
Yeah.
it has made us look at our business differently and the way we approach our customers differently, so that we are now more focused on what are our customers' needs, not the way we've always done it, but what are
Right.
the ways that our customers want to be served. And so I think that that's, you know, while that was really difficult and really hard for everybody, there is a silver lining to it. And there were changes that were made that I think have been beneficial to the industry and to your point, to other industries as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, we were forced to make some changes that we probably needed to have made sooner because, multifamily industry wasn't always the quickest to adopt things
Correct.
like
Still
technology and
aren't.
doing things. Yeah.
Yes.
So it was a good thing, even though painful to some degree.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence for a moment, which as a people development person, I'm in the people business. I love the fact that more businesses and leaders have been focused on emotional intelligence the last 10 or 15 years and acknowledging the importance of that. So when you think about emotional intelligence, how has EQ played a role in your success as a leader? And what advice would you give to aspiring leaders looking to strengthen this skill?
So I think it's critical. I used to tell my son when he was younger, being the smartest person in the room will not make you the most successful person in the room, because you have to be able, in the business world at least. Now, maybe if you're, I have a nephew that's a nuclear engineer. He probably needs to be the smartest person in the room. And he probably doesn't necessarily need to worry about his interpersonal skills as much. But if you're in the business world, and particularly if you're in multifamily in our industry, the people skills are critical. And that means EQ matters. And it matters as a leader because everybody's not going to adapt to you. You as the leader are going to have to adapt to your teams and know that you have to treat everybody equally, but you're going to treat them differently in the way you approach things. The how matters. And so one of the things is listening and looking for those cues. My husband and I, for example, are very different people. I love it when someone tells me I've done a good job. It embarrasses me, but I like it. My husband does not want to be front and center in anything. So you have to know that about your employees and know what is going to matter to them in the way that you give them feedback, in the way that you give them congratulations, in what matters to them in their career. Do they want to be the best in the role they're in and they really like the role they're in? Or are they highly aspirational and they're looking for the next step? If you don't know that as a leader and you can't adjust to that, you will lose those people and you won't get the best out of them. So I think that EQ is so important because the more you move up in your career, the more you are the person adjusting. And I think sometimes as a new leader, that's one of the hardest things to learn, is not everybody's going to adjust to you. Even though you're now the quote unquote boss, you really have to adjust to them.
100%. And, being the boss and the leader comes with a higher expectation of you really tapping into and understanding people. What makes them tick? What are their unique strengths? As you mentioned, how do they like to be recognized? What motivates them? And it's not a one size fits all. And, being in the people business, I'm a DISC consultant, and I leverage DISC and Clifton strengths frequently with my clients. And that really is the overarching message. We need to understand ourselves as leaders first. How do we show up? How is that resonating with the people on our team, particularly if their preferences and communication styles are very different or opposite from ours? I'm a DI, which means I'm direct and outgoing people person, but my D is higher than my I, which means I'm results focused, task oriented. I want to get it done. Let's go. But if I have people on my team who tend to be more reserved, who are S's, and so they're people focused, but they're also slower to adopt to change. They need more time for me to explain the process, right? And to explain the why, and to give them an opportunity to digest it before they can even get on board to make it happen. And if I'm not self-aware as a leader to know that, not only about myself, but about my team, I'm going to continually be met with a brick wall and a whole lot of resistance because I'm not communicating in a way that's resonating with my team. And, Rhonda and I were talking about this earlier, but I think we've both seen, hopefully it doesn't happen as much now as it did, although it's still a factor. We've both seen people being promoted into leadership positions because they were an excellent star performer, whether it was incredible financial performance with clients, operational excellence, and they're put into leadership roles where now the strategy is very different because it's no longer about me as a star performer getting things done, but now my job is to get things done through people. And if I don't tap into those individual strengths and preferences, as you mentioned, I'm not going to be very successful as a leader.
And that's exactly, I think that's where those strength finders and the DISC, all of those come into play. It's not to say people can't adjust, they certainly can, but play to their strengths. And one of the keys to that is to make sure you have different people. I know that I'm not a details person. I want to just go. So I need people on my team that are into the weeds and know the details and will say to me, well, wait a minute, we need to think about this, this, and this. And that's really important because not everybody's going to absorb it the same way. To your point, some people need to see it written down. Some people need to actually do it. And we need to make sure that we are offering that to all of our teams so we get the best out of them. And that means understanding what works for them.
Absolutely. And conversely, if you are a leader that's highly detail oriented and likes to go into the weeds, you're going to lose a lot of people because their eyes are going to glaze over. They're like, give me the headline, then give me more when I need it. Absolutely. I pick and choose when I want to dive into the weeds because as a DI, results oriented, I want it high level, go, go, go. But I want the details when it's appropriate. And I'll let you know, right?
Exactly. And then you need those details because you need the information to make the right decisions. But it's you need to figure out what works best for you and how to get those details and how the team should give you those details.
Yeah. And sometimes, like a highly detail oriented person can get stuck in analysis paralysis because they tend to be perfectionists. They want to research more. They want to dot the I's, cross the T's, make sure that it's accurate. And we have to help them by saying, okay, we've done enough research. Now let's headline it. What are our three options? Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now we need to choose the best path forward. And it doesn't mean it has to be perfect, but we have to start somewhere and we can always course correct after we have implemented something.
Which is why it's so important to have diverse opinions and diverse skills.
Absolutely. what we say in strengths is it's not about being a well-rounded person, which we were kind of all taught as children, right? You need to focus on being well-rounded. And if you're not good at something, try to be better at it. And there is some value to stretch goals and pushing yourself to get better in an area that might be a perceived weakness so that it doesn't get in your way. But by and large, we need to lean into our strengths. And the goal is for me as an individual not to be well-rounded, but for our teams to be well-rounded, which is exactly
play to people's strengths. That's going to make you, and if you have a well-rounded team, then you will have greater success because, again, you're playing to people's strengths.
Absolutely. Okay, so my next question. Looking back on your very successful career, can you share a moment when you recognized that your leadership had truly transformed a team or an individual's career path?
I've been very fortunate because I've had several of my former employees be incredibly successful. And one of them said to me one time, you taught me so much because you never answered my questions. She said, you used to make me crazy, but you forced me because you would say, well, what do you think we should do? And you forced me to think, and that person's gone on to be incredibly successful. And so it was really nice to see. And even when I was at Kettler, to see the growth that we had at Kettler from being, doing largely affordable, then to some new developments, then rolling into third party and being able to expand that. That was really gratifying to see our team come together, figure out how to do it, and be successful at it. So those are probably two of the big ones.
That's fantastic. When I started my entrepreneurial journey, I aligned myself with the John Maxwell leadership team, which you can see behind me. And one of the things that John talks about a lot and our mentorship team is, we need to be focused on developing other leaders. And so when you said, when people came to me, the feedback that I got was they learned so much because I never gave them the answer, but I helped them to find the answer and encouraged them to find it. I could not agree more with that philosophy. And, as a leader, I've always said, well, what do you think should be done? Feel free, come to me. I'm your support system. Let's talk things out. I'm here to support you. But when you bring me a challenge or a problem, I want you to think about, what do you think the next best step or move is? It doesn't have to be the right answer. And you may feel stuck and you're not sure, and we'll talk about that. But I at least want you to think about it and come to me with a proposed solution or a couple of proposed solutions. And then we can weigh the pros and cons and talk about what might make sense. And when we do that, we're developing others. And I probably as a young leader, I was fortunate to have leaders that did that for me. Right. And it helped me to grow.
Well, and I think it's really hard as a leader because you have the experience. It's so much easier to give people the answer. And I have to remember sometimes to stop and say, well, wait a minute, what do you think? Because I've been doing this a long time. I can say, here's what I would do, but that doesn't mean it's always the right answer. And there's not as much learning if we are giving people the answers all the time. So as a leader, stopping and pausing and saying, how would you do this? And so I try to remember that. I'm not perfect. There are times when I go, let's just do this. Going back to that, I want to get it done, kind of what you were talking about. But trying to remember to pause and say, well, what would you do? Or do you think this makes sense? Let's discuss it.
Yeah. And I think knowing when it's appropriate to take that action or strategy, because, the reality is sometimes we do need a leader who's an ID that's results focused, and we have a limited timeline and a decision needs to be made. And sometimes the appropriate action is to say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. But There are other times where we have more lead time where we can allow that process to be a little bit slower so that there's more learning.
And that's the balancing act of being a leader, is knowing when to do that.
Right. 100%. Okay. So my next question for you. So you've led several teams through change, obviously, and we mentioned COVID as an example. What are some key lessons you've learned about overcoming resistance? Because anytime there's change, resistance is a natural part of the cycle. Some people resist more than others, but you're going to get resistance. So, what have you learned about overcoming resistance and ensuring smooth transitions? How do you do that with your team?
So there are different ways to do it. When you come in as a new leader when I came into Bell, I had to recognize that the team at Kettler knew me. They knew exactly how I operated. The team at Bell didn't. And so hitting that head on initially, I fumbled my way through it for the first couple of times and realized people were like, didn't like what I was doing. And so I sat down and said, look, if you don't tell me what you like or dislike, I'm going to keep doing what I've always done because it's what's made me successful. So if you don't like it, let's talk about it. And I think you have to hit those things head on, but you have to be astute enough to recognize maybe what you're doing isn't working. And one of the other things I think when you're looking at like new technologies or new strategies is bring in the naysayers as well. Don't just go to the people you know are going to embrace it, because while the naysayers may be harder, they're probably going to see things that others see as well, but won't speak up about. And you need that. You need those people to give you that feedback. And if you can get them to embrace the change, then it's going to go much smoother. I think the other part of it is don't expect every transition to be smooth. There's always going to be bumps. The key is how do you handle the bumps and what do you do to address them and be willing to pivot? We do a lot at Bell, we do a lot of pilots. And there are times when we'll start a pilot and we'll go, you know what? This is not what we thought it was going to be. And we have to acknowledge that and stop and then move on. And sometimes that's hard if you've invested in something and you think you're very excited about it, but you have to be willing to pivot and course correct if it's not working.
I couldn't agree more. So I want to comment on a couple things that you said because I agree with them so passionately. The first one, when you talked about bringing in the naysayers, that is worth repeating and talking about for a moment because, in my work through DISC and statistics and all of that, about 69% of the population tend to have a preference to be reserved and very resistant to change. So that's the majority of our teams are going to be resistant. And they also might be hesitant to be vocal and to be honest. It doesn't mean that they're not thinking it, but we have to create that environment where it's okay to speak up, even if you're the only person at the table or in the room who maybe is pointing out a deficiency or disagreeing. Now, once we've thoroughly discussed it and had some healthy conflict and agreed as a group that, hey, we're moving forward in this direction, if you didn't agree with it, you got to say your piece, but collectively now we're moving this direction, then you need to support it. Right. But we do need to give people those opportunities to speak up and voice that unpopular opinion or point out something that no one else is pointing out, because the reality is, as you and I both know, they're still going to think it. And if we don't give them an opportunity to speak about it in a forum where we can discuss it, they're still going to talk to other people about it. And then you've got potentially disengaged team members because of the naysayers who didn't have an opportunity.
And sometimes you need to be able to explain the why to them. They may bring something up. And quite frankly, a lot of times they have valid points that we haven't thought about. And so you need that. It doesn't, I tell people all the time, you need to tell us what you think. You need to give us, the challenges. I can't fix all of them, but if I don't know about them, I certainly can't. And if I can't, I'm going to explain the why. You don't have to agree, but at least you'll understand the why behind it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that works as well. I just did a customer service session for a client last week. And when we're handling complaints from residents, for example, or from clients, It really is the same strategy. We are not always going to be able to give them 100% of what they want or
Correct.
100% of what they're requesting. But what we can do is first focus on the positive. Here's what I can do. Secondly, listen, which oftentimes that's really what our team members, our clients, and our residents want, is they want that opportunity to be heard, right? That solves a lot of it. And then working together with them on finding a solution that will at least get them closer to what they want. And you having an opportunity to explain, well, here's what I can give you and why. I can't do all of it, but here's what I can do. So
Correct. That's exactly right.
so powerful. All right. So my next question is a little bit about diversity. So obviously, you helped create the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, which is now a full-blown committee at NAA. And that was a long time coming and highly needed. So as we think about diversity, organizations thrive when they embrace diverse perspectives. So how have you seen inclusive leadership contribute to successful transformations, both within the organizations that companies that you've led, as well as the associations that you've led?
Well, I think the more that you have different perspectives, the better solution you get to. So when you bring everybody into the room, I think it makes a difference. And if you look at, for example, even at NAA, the difference now in the organization and ability to move forward and be successful, and the growth that has occurred at NAA has a lot to do with embracing those different perspectives, whether that's ethnic diversity, whether that's thought diversity, whether that's scale and size. When you look at the companies that are involved, all of those things matter. And what you realize is there are more similarities than differences. And then you use those similarities to find solutions, but taking into account the different perspectives that from your lens you wouldn't see. It also helps you. I remember when we first did the Diversity Task Force, we did this session where people stood in a line all in the same, and you took a step forward or backward. And what was really eye-opening about that for people is people that you perceived to be one way really weren't. And I'm one of those people. People look at me and go, well, you're the COO. Well, but I grew up in a military family that was an enlisted military family. I am a first generation college graduate. All of those people would not expect. And so until you talk to people, you don't know. And then it helps you understand then the perspectives they bring to the table. And they bring different perspectives because of what they've experienced, whether that's in business, whether that's in their personal life. All of that helps us frame and make better decisions. And I think when you look at companies that are highly successful, you look at their leadership and you look at their teams, and they're diverse.
Yeah,
and I think it's really important. And it's diversity across the board. It's not just male or female or religion or color. It's diversity of thought. It is all of those things. And you have to be willing to allow, like we were talking about previously, if you can't allow people to give their diverse opinion or a differing opinion from others in the room, you're not going to be better.
Yeah, 100%. And I have seen such a change, not only at NAA, right, but even other organizations that I've been involved with or that I've helped to support, as they've embraced more diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I love the whole diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, but people feel like they belong more.
Correct.
When you give them a voice, when you give them a seat at the table, when you allow those diverse perspectives. And everyone has a story, as you mentioned. And when we learn someone else's story, there really is such a paradigm shift, right? And
Correct.
We can't assume anything about anyone from what we think we know. Typically, what we think we know is very different from the full
reality. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. I think people make assumptions, and we all do it, myself included. We all make assumptions about people, but we don't know what's behind the curtain. And I think that's if the more we can keep them, we don't know what's going on in someone's life every day when they come to work. And if we can keep that in mind and give people a little grace, but also embrace the perspectives that they bring, it's going to make us better.
Absolutely. Love that. All right. So my next question. Okay. So about resilience again. How have you cultivated resilience within your team? So if you can expand on what we've already said, not just the strategies, but particularly morale. Morale tends to take a dip when there's a lot of change that is happening within an organization. Again, some of it, we have a strategy behind the change. Some of it, it's a reaction to something else that's happening, either in the market or the economy. So how do you keep morale up during those challenging times and help people to develop their own resilience?
I think first and foremost, you have to acknowledge it. If you don't acknowledge the fact that this is hard, the market's hard right now. It's volatile right now. Post-COVID, people are not as kind as they used to be, and that has impacted our teams on site tremendously. So acknowledge it. And then what can we do to help? Are there tools that we can give? Are there things that we can do to help people get through whatever those changes are? Because and that's how you build resilience. And let people know it's okay to acknowledge that it's hard. And it's okay to say, what, I need to take a step back for a minute and hope that your whole team doesn't have that at the moment, at the same time, and that you can support each other. And the more that you can do that, and the more you give people those tools, the more resilient they become. And part of that has to come from within you. You have to recognize when you've reached that breaking point. And it's funny because I generally am pretty good about it. My team's very good about knowing it's time for you to take a break. We can tell. And you have to have the longer term strategies, like you've been working 6 months straight and it's time for a couple of days off. Or for me, it's strategies. What do I do every day? I try to keep the same routines, whether I'm traveling or not. I try to exercise. Those things are important for me because they help me. Those are my strategies to help with my stress level, which then makes me more resilient because I don't react as quickly.
Right.
And look, we all have those times when we feel completely overwhelmed because you may have something going on at the office, plus going on in your personal life, plus. And knowing that and being, sometimes it's just letting people know, I need you to give me a little space right now. But helping people to know that it's okay to say that and then say, how can we help? What can we do to help you?
Yeah, I love that. And, you also mentioned not just helping our team with tools, resources. Sometimes it's just emotional support, even particularly when we're talking about organizational change. It typically involves changing a process or implementing a new system. So there's a lot of process driven, right, task focused pieces of that. But then there's the whole people side of change. And people are emotional beings who are sometimes logical. That's the reality.
Correct.
Some more logically minded people would argue with that, but then I would still argue you're still an emotional being who is sometimes logical. And there is a predictable cycle to change. And it follows that Kubler-Ross, emotional change cycle where, they fight it at first and then they start going down and they're like, oh my gosh, it's happening anyway. And most people at some point during that cycle will follow into a dip. Some people stay in the dip very short period of time. Some will stay in that dip or pit much longer. And so it's about recognizing when they're there and helping them to develop strategies to get out. But I loved what you said about acknowledging that for ourselves as leaders as well. We need to know when we're experiencing those dips. And oftentimes, I'm a recovering perfectionist, so let me know if you want to join the club. A recovering perfectionist, achiever, results focused. And so I've had moments in my career where my sort of tendency was to work longer and harder when I was overwhelmed. And sometimes that's a necessity. But as you mentioned, there are times where I need to do a check-in with myself and say, okay, it's time to step back and take a break, because we have to remind ourselves that we can't pour from an empty cup. And even though we think we're multitasking and being more efficient, chances are if we give ourselves time to take that break, we'll come back to it refreshed, renewed, better perspective, and getting things done faster, more efficient is probably going to happen if we give ourselves that time to take the break, which is sometimes hard to do for leaders, right?
And sometimes it's also, you may be doing damage that you don't realize because you are so, you're so focused or you're so stressed that you don't, you may snap at people or you may do things that are not typical. So I think it's recognizing your own signals as well, but recognizing for others and offering that help. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, you seem to be upset. Is there something I can do to help?
Yeah.
You can't make people tell you, but you can at least acknowledge that you see it, which ties back to the EQ that you were talking about earlier. And we have to be willing as leaders to understand that and give people space. And some people, to your point, some people need more time to process change than others. And we have to recognize that, especially like for someone like me who thinks, okay, let's just go. I love this. Other people are like, you want us to do what? Right. And give them time to absorb it and think about it. And some people are internal thinkers and some are external. I tend to be external. I talk. Other people need to absorb it and think about it and reflect on it and then come back.
Yeah, 100%. And, as leaders, so I was sharing a statistic with Rhonda earlier, and I shared this with Kirk a few weeks ago when we were chatting just about change in general. So over 75% of change efforts within organizations fail. And that's from statistics from the Gallup organization and Pew Research. And the reason they fail oftentimes is because as leaders, we've been developing a strategy, typically for some time, discussing it internally at the top, and not necessarily communicating our vision or thoughts or strategic plans to the rest of the team, because we feel like, well, they're not really ready for that yet because we're still figuring it out. But then by the time the leadership team has it figured out, there's typically a very short lead time for the rest of the team to not only be told about the change, but to your point, become comfortable with it. Well, the leadership team is very comfortable with it because they've been talking about it, let's say, for 6 months. And now the next level team has just heard about it, and maybe they only have a month or two of lead time. And then often what happens is the team that it's going to impact the most, the front line, they have even less lead time. And so knowing that if we can spend more time really communicating earlier versus later, and that's a big paradigm shift that I've seen in a lot of organizations. They're like, we're not ready to communicate. I'm like, well, maybe you don't want to communicate all of that. I acknowledge that, but what can we communicate now that at least says, hey, this is coming. We're still working out the details, but this is coming. Stay tuned for more. And that gets people mentally prepared. Oh, okay, something's coming. Because chances are they might have heard something through the grapevine anyway from someone else. And if we are not framing that message, what ends up happening? They create their own story, and typically their own
bits of information. People come up with their own narrative.
And then it's a lot scarier than the actual change that's typically going to take place.
And I think one of the things we have to remember, your point about people being resistant to change, it's very easy for us to sit here and say we like change. We like change when it's our change.
Yes.
When we're the one, if you come to me and say, well, I want to change that, I might be like, well, I don't want you to change that. So I think that's something for us to also keep in mind is, and you're right, we've had time to sit with the change longer than others. And so the more we can, one of my SVPs calls that the ta-da moments, when you just present it and say, ta-da, here it is, it's done. And that people are like, what do you mean this is done? Yeah. So I think that the more we can, and you can't always do that. There are things that doesn't work for, but when you can, it absolutely makes the change easier to happen.
Yeah, 100%. And I loved what you said. If we put our own hat on, put ourselves in their shoes, if this were us and we weren't part of implementing the change or even deciding the strategy or that it needs to happen, we would not feel as comfortable because
Correct.
we didn't have a hand in it. And when people don't have an opportunity to weigh in, they don't buy in, right?
That's exactly.
Yeah, love that. And we said this a couple of times earlier, and you said this just now, but worth reiterating, we can't always do it that way. There is a process to managing and leading change. There is a cycle that everyone's going to go through. We can follow that guideline, but sometimes we have to make a change and we have to pivot quickly because the market, the company needs it. Maybe there's a huge financial or risk component, so we've got to take action. But you said something earlier that I think is worth repeating, acknowledging, hey, this is happening. We know this is either scary, painful, it feels fast, whatever it is, we're acknowledging that. So here's what we're going to do to help you through. And
Correct.
We want you to communicate with us along the way. That can go a long way because now it feels like a partnership and they're invited into the change process versus feeling like it's just being forced upon them.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. So let me ask another question. This one is really about women in leadership. So women often face additional expectations or pressures in leadership roles. You may or may not have experienced some of that in your career. Can you, and you don't have to share a specific example, but if you're comfortable doing so, I think that would be great for our listeners. Can you share a specific example of something that's happened? And then how did you overcome that? And how did you build your own resiliency in order to get through that challenge as a woman in leadership?
So I think I can think of a number of things, but I would start with an overarching part of the additional burden for women in leadership is our own selves. We are much harder on ourselves and we hold things, I think, much longer than quite frankly men do. Men are able to shake things off faster than women are in some ways. I think there are plenty of things women do better than men, but there are a lot of things that we can learn from men as well. And I think that's one of the things to keep in mind. When we look at even roles to take on, we tend to say, oh, I can do 8 out of 10, I'm not ready. Whereas others may say, oh, I can do 6 out of 10, sign me up. And so I think that's the first step, is to recognize that you are good enough and that you can do this. You may not have all the skills. You may have to learn, and you have to be willing to listen and learn. But that ability to have some confidence in yourself, I think, is important. It's a balancing act. You don't want to be so overly confident that people think that you're not willing to listen, but you also want to be confident enough that you say, I know what I'm doing. I think the second thing for women, particularly women that are moms, is the guilt. The mommy guilt is very real, and I can speak from experience, and I'll give 2 examples. One was when my son was little, he was in kindergarten, and at that time, they don't do it anymore, but you could take cupcakes to school for their birthday. And I remember, I missed a lot of the moms' meetings and group things because I was working. And so I thought, well, I'm going to make cupcakes from scratch. I get home at night, I stay up late, I make these cupcakes from scratch. We're not going to do a box or anything. And I take the cupcakes to school. And the reality is, for a 5-year-old, they don't know the difference. I would have probably been better off going to Costco because they were bigger cupcakes and they had more icing. And so find those things that are really important and try to let go. Your child only knows, my child certainly only knew those things, his life with me working. And so for him, this was the norm. I was the one that had more of the guilt than he did. He was perfectly fine. But it also means that we have to be willing to ask for help. If we wait for people to notice that we need help, we're never going to get it. If you ask, you will get help. And this concept of it takes a village is very real. but you have to build that, and you have to be willing to ask for it. Another story on the mommy guilt. When I was being installed as secretary of NAA, my son was a senior in high school, and his team made it to the state championship for soccer. And it was the night of my installation.
Wow.
And so when I found this out, I was freaking out. I'm going to cancel. I'm not going to go. They'll just have to install me in absentia. I have, and my son, as only a 17-year-old boy can do, looked at me and said, "Mom, you do understand the only person upset about this is you." And I was like, "Well, okay then." He said, "You come to everything you can come to. I know you want to be there. It's okay. Dad will be there." And I was like, wow. And what I ended up doing was that they streamed it. So I had my iPad in my lap the night of our installation, and we watched as we were getting installed. We watched. So my point about that is, your children know that they matter to you, and you pick those things that matter to them. And so basically what he was saying to me is, you've been there for the important things. I get it. So I think that learning that and finding that balance, and balance is a tricky word because it's never 50-50.
Right.
You have to figure out when you need to be more at work and when you need to be more at home. And sometimes you're not going to be able to, sometimes those choices are hard. You have to make the best choices you can. And sometimes it may be that you go home, you take care of whatever you need to at home, and you get back online. Going back to what you said earlier, Stephanie, one of the beauties of COVID was we learned that that we can do work at different times, because the job still has to get done. And particularly in our business, we still have to get things done, but we can find those ways to do that.
Absolutely. There's so many things that you said that I could talk like for another hour, but I won't. But I want to reiterate a few. So, you talked about confidence and how sometimes as women, we actually can make it harder on ourselves. And I talked with Rhonda about this earlier today. I couldn't agree with that more, and I think learning to really find our voice and look in the mirror and find that confidence. I was coaching someone earlier this week about a job change, and she was talking about really feeling very guilty with, the salary range that they had first come to her with, and then they came back and actually kind of lowered it. And I'm like, no. So, and she's like, "But how do I address that?" And I said, "Well, you just simply ask for what you feel that you're worth." But her challenge was not feeling worthy, right? Which is why that conversation was uncomfortable. And so I don't know if you've read this book, but I bought it last year after I heard the author speak, and I've actually gifted it to a handful of friends and women in business. But it's called Worthy by Jamie Kern Lima. I got to hear her speak at the International Maxwell Conference a year ago, March. Fabulous book, really for men and women, anyone who may have an opportunity to increase their self-worth. But it is such a good book. And she also has a podcast that listeners, you can go listen to. If you purchase the book, it comes with a downloadable workbook, which is phenomenal. But it's such a great message, and it's so powerful that John Maxwell himself has actually referenced, some of her nuggets from that book. But I think worthiness is key, and building that self-confidence, to be able to ask for, number one, what you want, and number two, what you're worth. But I think that also ties right back into what you were talking about with mommy guilt, which, I have 3 sons, as you know, and my youngest is now a senior, which is hard to believe, because I think our sons were seniors at the same time. My oldest son,
that's right.
Crazy. But, there are things that I missed that, sure, I regret, that I wasn't there, but I tried really hard to make the right choices. And sometimes the right choice was getting a project done for work because it was necessary, and then explaining to my kids, hey, I can't be at this one because mommy has to do XYZ. But sometimes the right choice was not going to an event or a meeting or figuring out a solution like you did, with your son. But sometimes it was going to my son's event and
Absolutely.
not at a particular meeting. You have to decide, and you're the only one that can do this, which one is top priority right now, because you don't ever get a chance to make up those, moments as a mom or as a family member. And so choose wisely, but then also don't beat yourself up, because you can't be everywhere at once. And I'm kind of giggling when you were talking about the cupcake making, because I would make gifts for teachers. I've been traveling all the time for 25 years, right? And so I would scramble home and put on my June Cleaver hat, and I literally have aprons. So put on my apron, make the teacher treat, and I could have gone and bought sugar cookies for the kindergartners or first and second graders to decorate, because all they do is decorate with icing and throw sprinkles on there. But no, I had to make homemade cookie dough, right? Let it chill, roll it out, and make the cutout cookies myself with my awesome cutout cookie cutters. But my child didn't require that. That was a self-imposed.
It's a self-imposed. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think that is the key, is we have to make the choices that are best for us. And they're not, and one of the things I would say, like you were talking about, you had to get this done. What that also teaches our children about work ethic and what's important. And so you can't always be, well, work comes first, because that's not a good message either. But there are times when work's important. And, I think that those lessons to our children, and it's whether it's your children, your parents, because if you're in a different phase of your life where you're having to take care of parents or siblings, we all have things that pull at us. And it's finding what works best for you. And it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning. One size doesn't fit all.
Right. Love it. Okay, Cindy, I can't believe it's already been an hour, but I do have one more question for you.
Okay.
So initially, when we were going to chat, I was trying to do this during RPM Careers Week, but our schedules were crazy.
Yes. Yes.
But I still want to talk about, residential property management and careers that exist. So some people either listening live today or catching the replay may already be in multifamily real estate, residential property management. Some people may listen to this and be looking for a career change, or maybe they're graduating high school or trade school or college and they're looking for opportunities. So for existing or future leaders wanting to grow their careers, particularly women, but again, all, what key advice would you offer to those looking to become more successful leaders in this space? And you can maybe speak to existing leaders wanting to kind of expand their leadership opportunities, or new talent coming into the industry.
So 2 pieces of advice. One, always be willing to continue to learn. I think that I've been doing this for a very long time. I still learn every day. And if you think you know it all, then you probably should get out of the business, because there's always something that you can learn. And I think that is one of the biggest pieces of being successful as a leader, is to continue to learn. The second piece is get involved in the industry, because 1, it's a way to learn, but 2, it's a way to build your network, and you will find opportunities, because you learn leadership skills in very different ways. If you're not a leader in your organization right now, or you're not in a role that's a leadership role, go volunteer. You can be a leader elsewhere and learn those leadership skills. And if you do it in the industry, it opens up opportunities for you. So I think by giving back, you build up your network, but you also gain so much from being involved, because if you can manage a group of volunteers and get them to do what you want, you are learning far more about leadership than someone that you are paying their salary. So I really think, yes, because they have to. So I think those 2 pieces of advice would be the big pieces, I think, that help you as you grow in your career. And I guess the third piece would be yourself. Doesn't mean you have to not adjust like we talked about earlier, but you need to be authentic. People react much better to someone that's authentic.
Absolutely. And there's only one you. I truly believe that every
Correct.
single person has unique value and talents and gifts to contribute. It's about finding those. I loved what you said about continuous learning. Leader is my number one strength for Clifton Strengths. And obviously I'm all about learning. But, learning is not a destination. It's a journey. And the more I learn that there's more that I need to learn, right?
Correct.
And so if we have that mindset as leaders, we're always going to expand and grow. And I loved what you said about getting involved because there are so many benefits to that. And if I think about just looking back over my career, I had the benefit from being a brand new leasing professional when I was going to college at UT. She had me get involved in the apartment association, the local apartment association, my first month in the business. I took NALP, which it was NALP back then, or actually I think it was even called PLP. That's how long ago it was. It was back in But I started getting involved and then going to committee meetings and then getting involved at the state level and the national level. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. If you can get volunteer leaders on board to your idea and lead a team that doesn't report to you and they're not getting paid to do this, you do learn a whole lot about leadership. And I've met some of my probably the most influential people, some of the most influential people in my life, both personally and professionally, through getting involved. And so it's such a rich opportunity and experience.
I mean, two of my closest friends are from being involved in the industry. So
wonderful. Well, Cindy, it has been such a pleasure and an honor to have you here today to talk with me. Such great nuggets of knowledge and wisdom to share with our listeners. For those of you who are here with us, thank you for tuning in to the You Deserve More podcast spotlight interview with Cindy Clare. If you're catching the replay, thank you for tuning in. Comment, tell us what you learned today. What's one nugget that you can walk away with and use in your own leadership journey? And tune into the next one, which will be coming in a few weeks. Cindy, thanks again. Have a wonderful rest of your day and an incredible weekend. Thank you all for tuning in.
thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure.